Welcome everybody. I am Kelly Kowach. I'm the director of the Engaged Learning Office here at the School of Information. And we are so glad to have you here today for our theme year keynote address with Ben Marchionna from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. First, I'm going to introduce Cliff Lampe to do the introduction for Ben. So, here you go.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Cliff Lampe. I'm the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs and a professor here at the School of Information. I'm very happy for this event. This is a part of our theme year activity, and our theme for this year is the future of work. As part of that, I'm honored to introduce our keynote speaker, Ben Marchionna. This year's theme is something that we think is very important, right? It was come up in collaboration with student input, faculty input, staff input. Everybody had a hand in picking the theme. And we think it's important because it lives at the heart of the things that we at the School of Information care about, right? How is information going to drive the future? What is that going to look like for everybody? And how is innovation part of our story as we move forward into new careers that we don't even know exist yet? I've joked with many of you, I started the School of Information 173 years ago when I was a master's student here. And we didn't even call UX back then, right? It was HCI. At that point, we are now invested in careers we didn't imagine then. And you guys are starting on careers we can't imagine now. And I think as part of that, it's great to have Ben here as our keynote speaker. We're privileged to have him because he's a visionary leader in technology and innovation. And he shares his insights on this pivotal topic. So he's a career spanning numerous groundbreaking advancements. Ben brings a wealth of experience and forward-thinking perspectives to this discussion that we're having. Part of why this is so important is he's currently serving as Michigan's first ever Chief Innovation Ecosystem Officer, a role announced by Governor Gretchen Whitmer. He's dedicated to supercharging Michigan's innovation economy, and he sits at the kind of edge of founders, investors, universities, us, corporations, and government in terms of driving that mission forward. Ben's journey began here at the University of Michigan. He's a fellow Wolverine with all of you guys, where he earned his BSc in aerospace engineering before obtaining an MS in product development engineering from the University of Southern California. His early career stint at Lockheed Martin Skunk Works honed his expertise in revolutionary autonomous aircraft projects, setting the stage for his future endeavors. In subsequent roles, Ben demonstrated his entrepreneurial prowess and commitment to sustainability and technology. At SkySpecs, he assembled and led an international team to scale autonomous robotics and AI-based asset management solutions, propelling the company to operate nearly 100,000 autonomous drone flights at 2,000 wind farms across 26 countries. At Electra.Aero, he spearheaded technology innovation, contributing to the development of hybrid electric aircraft designed for the urban and regional markets. It's all cool stuff in areas that we consider ourselves cool, so it's great to have a cool partner teaming up with us. Ben's leadership extends beyond the corporate world. He serves as an appointee to the Unmanned Aircraft Systems Task Force for the state of Michigan and holds key positions on various boards, including the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics and the Los Angeles County Air Show. Recognition of his contributions include his recent honor as the University of Michigan College of Engineering's 2024 Alumni Merit Award winner, awarded for his remarkable achievements and dedication to the field of aerospace engineering. As we gather to engage in discussions, projects, and events related to our Future of Work theme year for the state of Michigan, Ben's wealth of knowledge and visionary outlook promise to help elevate our understanding of what we're looking at, and he can bring his insights both from his career but also his position within the state of Michigan to help us understand the problem we're trying to address and hopefully inform us on how we can go about our work. So with that, join me in welcoming Ben to the School of Information.
Thank you, Cliff. All right, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Cliff. Thank you, Kelly. I was noting earlier that this is my first time in the School of Information here in North Quad. It was being built while I was an undergrad in the College of Engineering, and I have made my first visit just in time for you guys to move to another building, which is currently being built up on North Campus. So my first and maybe last visit is excellent so far. Last year, I understand that my friend, the Lieutenant Governor, Garland Gilchrist, was the keynote speaker here talking about information for solving clean energy challenges, or clean water challenges rather. And Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist is a tremendous speaker. And what's really cool, in my opinion, is to have a U of M computer science alum in that role in state government. That doesn't happen in a lot of places. And so it's really fun to be able to nerd out with him on data. Both him and Governor Whitmer are super passionate about this notion of creating an innovation economy. And what we'll end up talking about today is sort of this intersection of the future of work and how that is specifically enabling the ability for Michigan to transform our innovation economy. So I've got no words on any of my slides, just tons of data over and over and over. So I'll do some talking to kind of give some context around each one of these different things here, but I'm going to walk you through the story with information to kind of understand how we're going to be able to do that with data-backed strategies to make it happen. As you probably, or as you may have seen, I want to calibrate everybody as well in that last weekend I saw that the university posted about this talk on some of their social channels, which are followed by a lot of people. And in it, they promised unparalleled insights on the future of work. That's a tall order. I will do my best to provide at least insights, and if I can, I'll make them as unparalleled as, as I possibly can. Preparing for this talk was actually a lot of fun. I started in my backyard sketching on my iPad kind of what the structure might be. Made some iterations at my office at Michigan Central Station in Detroit over the next few weeks. And then got most of the work done reading a bunch of studies and reports while around the campfire with my wife and kids at Wilderness State Park up in northern Michigan. And then wrapped everything up and actually built the presentation over the weekend from a garden patio at a San Diego Airbnb while my wife and I were out there for a fellow U of M alum's wedding this past weekend. And the reason I bring that up is I think that represents a lot of the elements of the future of work. Being able to do what you need to do, wherever you want to, however you want to do it, and on your own time schedule. And so as I was preparing for this, as I finished, I sort of realized that these are actually a lot of the building blocks of what will enable Michigan to be able to compete in the next generation innovation economy. And along the way, as probably many of you do within your role as students, if I found myself with some writer's block, I could hit up ChatGPT and be like, hey, what are some good strategies for working through this particular element, or if I'm looking for something like this. And so at the end of the day, I've got to deliver the message in person, face to face, and it's something that I'll have had to put together the structure of all of the logic. But you can also be supported with various AI-powered tools to help get through different elements or brainstorm more creative strategies to tell that story. So I thought that kind of was a nice way to lead into a lot of the different elements of the talk here. So today I want to talk about how the future of work enables the innovation economy in Michigan, why that matters to us, and then walk you through some of that data and strategy that has brought us to that point. I had the intro already, but I like to talk in pictures. And so what brought me here, born and raised in Michigan, school here in Ann Arbor for aerospace engineering, have always grown up loving all things that fly and rockets and stuff like that. Left the state, this will be a theme later on as well, left the state to go to the Mojave Desert, which is where you work on various secret airplane projects. So you gotta be willing to live in the desert. Did that for a while, and the technology itself was mind-blowingly advanced. I loved being out there, but I worked in a windowless basement on this isolated foundation with white noise generators in the hallway to prevent leaking conversations and physical combination locks through multiple sets of doors to get into your work. So the technology was super advanced, but I sure hope that's not the future of work. So that led me back to Ann Arbor to join SkySpecs and talk about a 180, big giant multinational corporation, aerospace and defense, working on secret research projects, to early stage, and we were 7 employees at the time when I joined, startup focused on clean energy, autonomous drones, small scale, global footprint, all of these things. And with a culture that I fell in love with very quickly in terms of the way that startups think about things and outside the box, but you can also move very quickly, and you have much more of a forward-thinking future of work element at a startup than you would at some sort of a big company. And so that's what brought me back here. And then similarly, during COVID, I was able to join a company based out of the Washington, D.C. area, which was only possible because of the way that work started to shift. And we'll talk about that too. This was another startup building hybrid electric aircraft. Actually, this one here on the top right, it's an airplane that can take off and land from soccer field sized spaces, and it's hybrid electric. So that's what we spent building. And I commuted down to DC every week for those 4 years. And that wouldn't have been possible without the future of work being able to enable that. So what this looks like next is some of the stuff that we'll get into here. And that allowed me to focus on where I wanted to live, and work could be independent of those things. That's probably particularly applicable at a startup. But now, as we've seen those shifts change, that is going to be much more of the case for large companies as well. So I'm just a few months into my role, about 5 months, with the background in startups and aerospace and defense. My first role in government that has been a fantastic learning experience as well. And at its heart, though, it's about solving really challenging problems with data. Whether it's an engineering project, or in this case, the data are like qualitative relationships and social and political capital that you get to trade versus like fundamental physics that would have guided some of the previous projects. But at the end of the day, the types of problems and how you go about solving them are essentially the same. And so I think that's very fitting to now be here at the School of Information, this intersection of human behavior and technology and society and information. So I think this is a perfect place to have this sort of a discussion. So as the new CIEO, EIEIO is the right constant joke that we now make within the office. I now spend a lot of time thinking about the future of work because of how relevant it is to what I've been charged with trying to figure out how to do, which is transform the state's innovation economy. So why does that matter so much to the state? Innovation, entrepreneurship, et cetera. Why should the state care about this in the first place? Being an engineer, this being the School of Information, it'd be unfair to do anything but start with data. So this is the problem that Michigan's facing. We're not growing as a state in terms of our population, and that threatens our future. If you can see here, I realize this is a little bit small, but this is the US population. This gray area is roughly today, 2024, and this goes up to 2050. So the US population sort of expected to do this, crest around 360 million in 2050. And then Michigan, from like 1985 up to this point, had a pretty steep population curve. And then it started to dip and is projected to peel over. And we'll talk about why in a second as well. But our greatest strength is the people that live here. And we're starting, or at least projecting, to lose them for a couple of different reasons. Throughout most of the 20th century, groundbreaking innovation driven by automotive and also various advanced manufacturing and industrial sectors created the conditions that brought a lot of people here. They had a pathway to great education, high-paying jobs. They came from all over the world to be able to access some of those things. And as you did that, you had more opportunities for home ownership. That education allowed really thriving communities, and you had a lot of economic mobility, which is what drove that big period that I just pointed out on the left there. But since that period in 1980, the state of Michigan has only grown our population by 8.8%. That's compared to 46% for the rest of the US overall. And so each year we end up losing more people than, or that come in than actually go out at the end of the year. Now, this isn't just a challenge unique to Michigan. This is sort of most of the Rust Belt there. And as that Rust Belt workforce, the baby boomers age, many of them are choosing to move to warmer climates. Not just Florida, but you can see the greenish blue is a percent change of like roughly 1% for the dark blue. And then the dark red is roughly minus 0.5% or more. And so a lot of the Rust Belt states, parts of California, driven by some cost of living stuff, everyone's moving to these other areas. And then this is from 2021 to 2022. So this showcases a lot of what happened during COVID as well. And then similarly, a lot of the southern states are starting to invest in growth industries and pulling out all the stops because they haven't really had a lot of things that were attracting those industries before. Whereas in a place like Michigan, or a lot of the places in the Rust Belt, we've got a lot of traditional industry that is very capital intensive with real big machinery. It's hard to turn that on a dime with these types of companies that are driving it. They're interested in innovation, but they either don't know how to do it or they can't fund that with the business models that they have. And so the southern states have taken advantage of that and are investing really heavily, which is drawing a lot of the young, educated workforce into those states. So we'll talk about that in a minute as well. So why does that matter? The population growth in the first place, right? These things naturally go up and down, but this is the key here. A healthy economic growth cycle looks like the element here on the left. So as population comes in on the left side of that wheel, that creates a economic vibrancy through the tax revenue that you get by having that population there. That allows you to make public investments in those communities, which is good for the communities. It attracts people, it gets them excited, they stick around, new people come from out of state, and then that flywheel continues. On the other hand, off on the right, this is where it can get a little bit concerning, sort of the economic doom loop. If you start to have, or rather if you don't do anything about population growth, then you end up with labor market challenges in that area. You literally don't have enough people to do the work or the jobs that allow that economy to exist. You lose all of that tax revenue. You can't invest in your communities. People say, hey, this isn't a great place to be. I'm leaving. And new people look in and say, this doesn't look so fun. I'm not going to go there. I'm going to go somewhere else. And this ends up being a bit of a doom loop. So we don't want that. And for Michigan, one of the particular challenges that we have as well is that the largest share of population that's leaving are you, and it had been me when I left to California as well. It's the young and the educated, and these are often the folks responsible for growth out into the future. Driven by a lot of complex factors, but we'll touch on a few of them here in a minute. So I mentioned that in the 80s there was this time of industrial revolution, at least as it pertains to the auto industry. And on the left here, these are the top 10 cities in the US in terms of median earnings. 5 of the top 10 cities in the US in 1980 with the highest earnings were in Michigan. That's kind of wild to think about when you think about where those cities might be today. This study ended in 2016, but as you look here, it's basically California, specifically the Bay Area and LA, New York City, DC, and parts of Texas. Those numbers in 2024 are only more exacerbated now, and as you'd expect, there's still no Michigan cities close to being on that list. So change is inevitable no matter where you look. And so this point here, I realize you don't really need to see the details because it's so far away, but what this shows is that 60% of jobs that were done in 2018 hadn't been invented in 1940. In 1940, these blue curves here, most of the work was farms, mining, and production, huge numbers, right? And then this is what's basically being done now. So not nearly as many people are in production, but what you'll see is a lot more professional work, a lot more managers, and things like that. And so what this means is that off on the right, these are some of the jobs that, if you look at what the US Census counted as different jobs in 1940 and over every decade from then until now, I'll read these to you. The first few in 1940 and 1950, the type of titles that were added by the Census Bureau included airplane designer, beautician, gambling dealer. In the last decade or two, wind turbine technician, sommelier, drama therapist. I didn't even know that drama therapy was a thing, but nonetheless, that showed up in 2018 as part of the US Census's title. So this gives you a little bit of a sense of how those things change. And the point is that change is inevitable, and it's hard to predict what the future is going to be, other than the fact that the future is moving forward. And at the end of the day, while change is inevitable, growth is a choice. And so for the state of Michigan, we've chosen, in my opinion, one of the most exciting, fascinating endeavors that we've looked forward to in our state's history, which is to grow. We don't want to accept sort of what the status quo will say. If you look at the growth curve from the 80s through 2000, we should be able to get back on that with the right focus on the government side and connecting some of the different elements of our stakeholder ecosystem. So we want to change the shape of the curve, and if we do nothing, it'll follow that declining position. So this is where the topic of the future of the work becomes paramount. Okay, so we've chosen to grow. So what jobs do we want to grow? Do we need to grow to spur the economic growth and vitality that we envision? We can't grow everything. We don't have enough resources for that. So we've got to be really specific. And so this is where the data starts to inform our decision making. It's these two columns here, early growth and scale stage startups. They have a few important characteristics: relatively high wages, good employee benefits, a lot of wage mobility, and rapid growth. They're also the type of industries that draw young, educated folks to as well. And so the others are all important to an overall economy, but if we have to focus on one and we've chosen to grow, this is where our head needs to be at first. Why does that matter? It matters because new businesses create all net new jobs. The blue lines here represent firms that are 6 years or older, whereas the pink lines are firms that are 5 years or younger. And what you'll see is that as the economy changes over time, this is from 1980 to 2020 for each one of these, manufacturing, retail, information, health, accommodation, and food services, they ebb and flow with the economy. And the blue line is sitting right at about net zero in terms of for the vertical axis. And so they have growth spurts, and then they lose some people. Whereas the younger firms, unsurprisingly, are bringing in new investment. They're typically in growth industries, and they're the ones responsible for all the net new jobs. Even as you correct them across economic cycles, they kind of follow the same rough trends, but they're the ones that are bringing in new net jobs to an economy. Now, occasionally, those younger firms are at higher risk of some of the market conditions. So if you look at the information jobs, here's the dot-com bubble burst. So relative to the established firms that had that risk mitigation in place, those jobs drop precipitously. If you look at something like maybe retail or accommodation and food services in the 2008 recession timeframe, that drop was a lot bigger than the traditional industries. And then you'll see similar themes around some of these others. This doesn't even include COVID, right? This is just pre-COVID data. But the point is the same. New businesses are responsible for all of the net new jobs. So if you want to grow an economy and you want to add jobs, focus on the new businesses. Okay, so the growth is driven by the young and educated. So what do you need to get them in? This is sort of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but for young people. What do you want? The base of the pyramid, you want to get paid, and you want to get paid to do something in a cool industry. You don't want to be in a declining industry. Once you've got that piece of the pyramid done, then it's about what are you doing? What's your life like? You see the chill vibes piece here. Walkability, affordability, access to public transit, parks, a vibrant arts and culture scene, things like this. And then the top piece, once you've got all of those met, is public policies that you agree with, that are more focused on the future and less focused on the past. So over the past year, the state of Michigan, before I had even arrived, it's part of what led to the creation of my role in the first place, we've been reorganizing our economic development function towards what we've called the Make It in Michigan strategy. You don't need to be able to read the details. I'll talk you through a couple of things. Governor Whitmer hired my colleague Hillary Doe, the state's first chief growth officer, actually the US's first state, chief growth officer, to go help figure out with data what to do. Hillary's also a U of M grad, and part of those recommendations worked into this triad of a flywheel, which we'll talk about in a minute, dedicated to this notion of growing the population. She formed the Growing Michigan Together Council, plucked all kinds of stakeholders from across the state to provide these inputs, looked at the data, and then came up with this flywheel. And so what this basically does, first, up at the top, establish Michigan as the innovation hub of the Midwest and America's scale-up state, with a goal to elevate Michigan's median income from 34th to top 10. To be able to do that, businesses need talented people to grow, building a lifelong education system focused on future-ready skills and competencies, bringing post-secondary attainment in Michigan from 33rd to top 10. Follow around the flywheel. People want to live and work in vibrant places. We talked about that. Focus on creating thriving, resilient communities that are magnets for young talent. Bring net talent migration from 20th to top 10. And then the flywheel can continue because places need businesses to grow. Being an innovation hub brings in those new businesses to be able to focus on that. So this is what that Make It in Michigan strategy is all about, something totally new for the state. It sounds like really obvious, right? But most states don't do this or don't think like this. So this is what has been built over the last year. And then as you can imagine, that top piece is what my role was chartered with. It's what was why it was created. And then we've got other elements of the economic development function focused on the others. You saw at the start that my employer is the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. I hadn't quite appreciated exactly what that means. It's a quasi-state or quasi-government private role, if you will. And so that allows us to work for and with the governor's office and the state legislature and different stakeholders around the state. But we can move a little bit more quickly because we are a corporation. So we have more tools at our disposal than you would otherwise have if you were like a no-kidding state employee. So it's just the way that a lot of states organize their economic development functions to be able to do this kind of work. But I consider myself, here for the state of Michigan. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip through a bunch of logic steps that make up these pieces and just walk you through the logic tree. Growth requires young people. Young people requires careers, not jobs. That requires growing industries, not declining industries. To have growing industries, you need startups. If you want startups, you need a bunch of founders and funders to support those startups. And if you want to attract founders and you want to attract the capital that will support those founders, you need a pervasive, thriving culture of innovation at the base. We could do presentations on each one of these, but I figured I'd boil it in one slide for now to get to the next element that we're going to talk about. So what is an innovation ecosystem? Cliff mentioned that there's 5 key stakeholders: startups and their founders, the risk capital that allows those to grow, universities, key element, corporations, and the government. There's other elements here too, but they're all in these very complicated web where they each feed off of each other. Some are early sparks that lead to the big ideas that come later. Some allow the scaling. And so this is sort of what we think of when we think of an innovation ecosystem. And this is where my optimism for the future of Michigan starts to go off the charts. We have all of the ingredients to be able to make this ecosystem successful. And we have them all in abundance. We'll talk about a couple of these things too, and it sort of presents this quandary of, we have all this stuff, what do we need to tap into to be able to get that engine to move in the direction that creates the population economic growth cycle that we're interested in doing. So actually I'll come back to this in a minute. I don't want to spoil it. Some of those ingredients, half of Michigan college grads who have moved away, so including myself, through a bunch of different surveys that the state does, are interested in moving back to the state within the next handful of years. They perhaps want to leave after undergrad, maybe go try something new, work somewhere different, and then they perhaps are interested in coming back to the state after they've gotten your early 20s out or something like that. I was in the same way. That's what brought me to California. I lived in Texas or Fort Worth and Atlanta for a little bit before going out to California, but nonetheless, it was an excellent way to build the foundation for a career, and then that opened up the door to come back here and make a difference in a way that I hadn't put in my original career plan, but was a key piece of that decision. Michigan is also the fastest growing state for venture capital investment in the country. We've grown nearly 1,000%. It's like 880% from 2016 to 2020. Ann Arbor was ranked at the top of cities for women-founded VC-backed startups in the US. Ann Arbor is also ranked a top 25 innovative US cities across all cities, including big ones, and a top new tech hub. Meanwhile, Greater Detroit was recently named the #1 global emerging startup ecosystem. which is kind of wild to think about, but really, really exciting. And it's had a whopping 37% growth in high-tech employment since 2010. Detroit is also the third fastest growing city for median wages in the country. So this starts to get to a couple of the elements of the ripe ingredients that I was talking about. So this other chart here, Michigan is number 8 in terms of research and development spend as a percentage of state gross regional product. We are number 6 for business performed research and development as a percentage of private industry output. Number 8 for patents awarded per million people, right? So these are like some really important factors. Being top 10 in any of these is really hard when competing with some other states who really dump money into this. And then the University of Michigan, if we zoom in here for a minute, U of M is number 8 in the world in terms of the number of VC-backed founders who are alums of the university, wherever they live. And this report just came out a couple of weeks ago, but the university's tech transfer office, which is called Innovation Partnerships, in fiscal 24, they reported a new institutional record of 615 inventions reported. They call it disclosure reports, there's only 2 or 3 institutions in the world that are producing something like that, and U of M is one of them right here in our backyard. Additionally, U of M students and faculty launched 28 startup companies last year alone, and they have continually year over year, let alone all the other universities in the ecosystem. And those companies last year have raised over $500 million in follow-on investment once they've got out to launch. There's a list that Inc. and Fast Company puts out called the Ignition List, and U of M is number 3 globally on this list. And this measures things like the ability to get government R&D grants, performance of the tech transfer office, the number of VC-backed founder alums, the amount of money that they raise, all kinds of factors that basically say, how successful are you in producing innovation? Specifically, innovation that has an impact on businesses and society as a whole. Number 3 in the world is pretty awesome in that respect as well, to be sitting right here. And what that ranking shows is that the university is an incredible enabler of ideas, businesses, and opportunities that can really shape cities, regions, and countries toward a better future. So to have this innovation engine living here, I'm incredibly proud for that to happen, and it's a key element of that innovation economy growth that we're interested in as well. It's also created all sorts of companies, thousands in total over just the last handful of years. These are just a few of some of the bigger ones in various areas. Most that you tend to not hear about. Most people don't hear about the majority. It's kind of like the iceberg, right? The startups that are doing really good work. You hear about the ones that make big news, but it's some of the ones sort of in the middle that end up really moving things along in an interesting way as well. So this is just a tiny fraction. Meanwhile, I borrowed this slide from Doug's song. Doug founded the cybersecurity firm Duo, which is headquartered over on Main Street. And he sold Duo to Cisco in 2018 for $2.4 billion. Doug and Duo were Michigan's first unicorn, a startup worth over $1 billion. Since 2018, we've had 7 additional unicorns in that tiny time frame. I only have the other 5 from Doug's slide here. You can see he's wearing a unicorn hat in each of the pictures with the founders once they did their sale. But basically, this is pointing out that our ecosystem is starting to churn out really big, innovative companies in just the last number of years. Similarly, Ann Arbor alone, nearly every year for the past 20 years, has had an exit of $100 million or more from one of these startups. Again, these tend to not be reported. Most of the media in the state of Michigan, it's kind of like a Midwest thing. They tend to think about some of the traditional industries. We don't have a lot of tech media talking about what startups are doing or what really interesting, innovative things are happening. Within the university ecosystem, you probably get a fair amount of that because this is, the beating heart of that. But outside of the university ecosystems, the rest of the population of the state, certainly the policymakers and others that are trying to think about decisions, they tend to not get this information and don't know that this innovation engine lives right here. So we've got all the right ingredients. And because of the changes in the future of work, these can be combined to do some special magic. March 11th, 2020 was a major world event. My second child, Lincoln, was born that day. Also, COVID was declared a pandemic, which is probably more relevant to the future of work here. But nonetheless, from that point forward, the ability for Michigan to compete in this innovation economy fundamentally changed for a few reasons we're about to get into here as well. The first one, this is from MIT's Future of Work study. They've got a whole book on the future of work. David Mendel, one of the professors in aeronautics and astronautics at MIT, was on this committee. Turns out I'd actually met him as part of working with Electra, a big MIT crowd that was at Electra. But a few years ago, they published this book on the future of work. This is one of the things that I read in preparing for this talk as well, because of how relevant it was to my day job, looking at innovation economy development. But this study found that 59% of employees today are now working flexibly or remote. And most of these businesses expect that this is only going to continue to grow in a really rapid way. In fact, LinkedIn's chief economist recently pointed out that pre-pandemic, 1 in 67 jobs were remote. Post-pandemic, 1 in 7 posted jobs are fully remote. That's a wild shift, and I think it's very indicative of where the economy is going as well. And that change isn't just driven by employers looking to make a buck or something like that. It's driven by the employees. They're making these changes because the current employees demand it, and the talent that they want requires it if they're going to come over to those companies. So it's more of a pull than it is a push from the companies that's driving these big changes. This is another one from the MIT study. The next element here is that the pandemic dramatically accelerated a cost of living and quality of life trend divergence that had been brewing for decades. This doesn't even go through the pandemic. This goes from 1948 to 2018. And what's going up and to the right, relatively linearly, is productivity per hour. And then what flattens out in roughly 1973 is median compensation, which has not grown relative to what productivity you get. As you'd expect, when you run these numbers for 2020 to now, it explodes in a way that's not good for the future workforce, which is leading to all kinds of the types of problems that are showing up in the world today. Millennials and Gen Z are getting the short end of that stick. That short end is leading us to focus on good careers and a good life, and not trying to sacrifice one for the other. Making maybe a sacrifice in where we live in the name of having a little bit better semblance of having it all than what our parents or grandparents' generations might have been able to enjoy before us. That's made a lot of big tech hubs, Silicon Valley, Miami, Austin, et cetera, New York City, lose a fair amount of population in the last few years. And between 2022 and now, that divergence has also continued to accelerate. If you look at San Francisco County as an example, minus 7%. Green is where people move to. You'll see that there had been a big influx into places like Miami as a tech hub too. Miami here shows no growth. And that's because Miami is now the most expensive city in the United States. It's not actually Manhattan. It's because of all the folks that moved there during COVID too. And what you'll see is a couple of different trends. So not only are folks leaving some of the big tech hubs, but there's two factors. One, they're moving to more rural places near natural resources, Utah, Idaho, et cetera. You even see a big influx to northern Michigan, centered around Traverse City. And then the other element is they're moving to warmer states that are relatively more affordable. So not Miami, but like Orlando or parts of Scottsdale and Phoenix and Vegas in some of the desert states. So all of that was only possible because of how COVID shifted the future of work. And the opportunity created by the nexus of the future of work and the thriving innovation economy that we're seeking to build is partly why we're talking here today. But I think that Michigan has maybe the arbitrage opportunity of a generation to try and take advantage of these different factors. Top talent leaving expensive places with a wealth of natural resources and good quality of life, good cost of living, and this totally under-leveraged innovation engine that is brewing, in particular within Southeast Michigan, but certainly around the broader piece of the state as well. We've got some really massively under-leveraged homegrown assets. So the future of work, it allows you to live anywhere. People are picking places that they want to live as a result of that. They're not forcing themselves into wherever they happen to find a job. They're finding a place they love first and then finding a career that works for them as a result. That's certainly what had driven my wife and I back to Ann Arbor. First, it was following SkySpecs. And then when I joined Electra, I stayed because I really, really liked Ann Arbor. You may not even realize this. I certainly had not as a student, but Ann Arbor has been the #1 city in America for quality of life for a number of years running. It's also been the most educated city in America, like per capita, for a similarly long period of time. It like trades between here and Cambridge and parts of Seattle. And so there's a lot of real interesting factors that make a relatively tiny city like Ann Arbor, 100,000 people, punch way above its weight class. And that's very similar to what I was talking about with what the University of Michigan offers within that tiny ecosystem. And similarly, Detroit has a lot of these things going for it too. We'll talk about that in a minute. Talking about the U of M component for a minute, because I think it's important while we're here. Most of you probably wouldn't have looked this up, but the university about a month ago released their blueprint for our future is what they call it. It's the Campus Plan 2050. And North Campus, as you know it today, is down here. So this is where the new School of Information will be at Line Weber, Aerospace Engineering buildings over here, the Ford Robotics building is up here. The university plans to build over 30 new buildings and create an innovation district in what is now a bunch of green space. They're going to preserve a lot of that green space, but it's going to live within there, and they're going to do all kinds of things to enhance it. With that's going to come an autonomous transit connector between North Campus and Central and all the way down to the athletic fields on the south side town. And these are a couple of the renderings that they've plucked in for what they think the North Campus Innovation District will look like. This isn't like Central Campus. This is what they want North Campus to be. So any blue building there is a new building that they're going to add specifically focused around entrepreneurs, industry research, bringing in risk capital to like be embedded there and create this really thriving innovation ecosystem within the university that's going to draw in all kind of players from out of state as well, as you'd imagine. And something like that with the ingredients that we've already talked about, that's going to create the kind of companies that will disrupt industries across the world. That's going to be something super, super interesting right in our backyard. And I think what's really cool is that this is not just happening in Ann Arbor, this is happening in Detroit too. Has anyone been to Michigan Central Station in Detroit? For those of you that haven't, go check it out. This was a symbol of the decline of Detroit for years and years. It was, that's the building here on the left. It's right in Corktown, just outside of downtown Detroit. And it had been in total disrepair for decades. Originally, it was the train station that all folks moving to the state would come into out in Detroit during like the really vibrant days. 7 or 8 years ago now, Bill Ford bought the building and has invested $1 billion into it. And it is now the innovation hub of the state of Michigan. This is where my office for MEDC is located. There's the train station here. And as of 2 weeks ago, 1,000 Ford researchers just moved into that building, the big one there. And right next to it is the old book depository where the city of Detroit's public school books were housed. Similarly, was in absolute disrepair. You won't believe the pictures if you look it up, what it had looked like before either of these two buildings. And that is now these two pictures on the right. My office, in that case, it lives right over here up on the 3rd floor, and it's absolutely amazing what they've done. So it's become this symbol of the future of the state of Michigan right in Detroit. Up on the top right, though, I pointed out the University of Michigan's new building that they are in the process of putting up right in the city of Detroit, just about a mile from Michigan Central Station, which is the University of Michigan Center for Innovation, UMCI. And this is going to create this fascinating innovation corridor between Ann Arbor and Detroit, where the university picks up a huge presence in an area that they've left out of the equation for quite a while, at least in terms of having real physical footprints with no kidding research and development happening there. And this corridor is going to be this avenue for creating, for going from bits to atoms, if you will, right? Everything from software to scaling hardware-based products. You can leverage the industrial heritage that Detroit is known for globally. The Southeast Michigan region, driven by that industrial heritage, is actually the #1 cluster of mechanical and electrical engineering talent in the world. I think most people think that that would be somewhere else, but this is that notion of building physical things that had made Michigan in the decades prior, and reinventing these things with some new innovation engines will remake it into something really special in the future. So part of that vision looks similar to Kendall Square. So Kendall Square, this is a part of Cambridge in Boston, roughly between MIT and Harvard. On the left, this was 1980. There was not much in that area whatsoever outside of the university boundaries. Around that time, the greater ecosystem got together and made some really strategic investments similar to what we're talking about in Michigan. And that has led to what it looks like today off on the right, which is a vibrant ecosystem with all sorts of resources, high-tech bio, tons of VC, lots of startups. And so that change is possible when you have the right focus and you choose to grow and not just live with change. To kickstart that journey, the state of Michigan is already working on a $60 million innovation fund that should get through the legislature in the next couple of months. This is step one on a longer journey, but it's going to be focused on early stage startup funding, specifically looking after some of the things that we've talked about today. It's the beginning of a new chapter. It's our commitment to nurturing that foundational layer, which we want to be able to build on. And as my role as CIEO, to build the connective tissue across these big 5 stakeholders, including doing things like talking to all of you and helping you understand why we're going this direction and some of the assets that you may not be aware of in the state as we go towards this future. We're trying to make sure that this strategy is grounded in data. I mentioned I don't have any words here. It's just all been the information that led us to our conclusions today. And we want to be able to knit these pieces together in a way that allows us to think differently and get everyone on board in this endeavor. I had AI, I had DALL-E generate the number of times that I had to iterate to get something that looked decent. The robots aren't coming for our jobs yet, maybe in the future, but at least today it has some work to do. The future of work is one that puts you in the center. It's one where you work wherever you choose to live. It's one where you can be in a community that cares about your well-being and your sort of holistic health. And it's one where you can have more, or you can be closer to having it all. Along with countless others, I'm focused on helping lay a foundation for that growth in Michigan, but it won't do anything unless people like you build on that foundation. I think in the 5 months that I've been on the job, I've been absolutely blown away by the optimism and excitement across each of these stakeholder bases to do something different and to build on that kind of a foundation. And so that is certainly my charge for all of you as well. You're the future of work. You can in Michigan. And I'm always here as a resource if you'd like to talk about that at any point, whether now or if you boomerang like me and so many others did and you go somewhere else and you want to come back later, always happy to talk about this. So thank you very much for having me. I think we can probably get into a few other topics during the fireside chat, but thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ben. We are now going to have, move this forward.
Time for chairs.
Yes, we're going to have Charlotte Parent, the president of SIVA, the School of Information Bachelors Association, chat with Ben for the next about 10 minutes or so and ask him some questions. So,
Super.
yeah, I'll let you go.
All good.
Hey, Charlotte.
How are you?
Doing great. Thank you.
Thank you for that great talk. It was so great to hear about, and I know especially as graduating seniors soon to enter the workforce, it's been tough.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah, I have a few questions to get us started.
Perfect.
But I guess for the first one, what advice would you give to aspiring leaders who want to really, drive change and innovation in industries?
Awesome question. My advice, stay curious and be bold. I think that the innovation that we require to get to the next step requires not being bound by the box of what has been, and making sure that you're focused on testing all the boundaries. Is this really a constraint for what I want to do? I think that there's a lot of new ideas that die relatively early because it's like, oh, this doesn't fit in the box. Break the box apart. This is the best time in your life to do that as well. As students transitioning into your career, you have a relatively short period where you can ask any question, you can go try any new thing, and it doesn't matter if it succeeds or fails, because that won't be won't be reflected on your long-term report card, if you will. If you make those mistakes later in your career, that can be harder to recover from. So experiment while you can, and don't be afraid to think bold.
Yeah, for sure. I know especially that, thank you. I know that's really what drew me to the School of Information in the first place, is that it's just so interdisciplinary. Information really does change everything and all
Absolutely.
that. So perfect. And then another question, I guess sort of still related to students at Michigan, but how can students at institutions like Michigan you really maximize their time and or education to help drive innovation and all that great stuff?
Great question. So while you're here, things that I wish I would have done even more than I had: get out of your comfort zone. For similar reasons that I just talked about, this is the best time to experiment. That will feel super uncomfortable when you're doing it, but each time you do it, it's like you're building up scar tissue almost, right? You're expanding that comfort level, and the more times you do that over and over and over, by the time you look back over at the end of undergrad, you'll feel very confident about doing all kinds of different things. That journey is one where each time you expand it, you'll be like, oh God, I did something so embarrassing, or you totally shot yourself on the foot or something. That's part of the process. Just like doing presentations, first time you do them, super nervous, and then as you do them 1,000 times, it's really not a problem. So get out of your comfort zone while you're here as a student. Build relationships with not just your fellow students, but also your faculty and some of the other resources on campus. You similarly have a relatively short period of time where you get to interact with these folks. And you're going to follow them throughout your career, especially the ones who you think are poised to make an impact. So I've been blown away at the number of times some fellow U of M grad down the road, totally different state, different part of the world, that I bumped into them, and we have some shared experience that allow us to build that network down the road. So absolutely take advantage of that while here, and that even now, it may feel awkward to figure out how to do that with your professors. Those have been some of the most rewarding relationships down the road in my career, to now come back and be able to tap into that knowledge base in each one of the different jobs that I've done. So I absolutely encourage you to go out of your way to build some of those relationships too.
Yeah, we are just so spoiled with great faculty and students.
100%.
100%. Another quick one, sort of related to the, more directly to future of work, but curious to think what skills you think might be important for the future of work, especially with the changing technologies and remote work. And
absolutely. There's a backup. If we share these with everyone later, there's a backup slide that talks about exactly this. It's from the World Economic Forum from the Future of Work report that they did. And it identified 10 skills that are essential to succeeding in the future of work as defined by businesses. And of the top 5, there's a theme that emerges, which is analytical thinking is number 1, creative thinking is number 2. These are typically things on a very different part of the spectrum, so it's kind of being like ambidextrous with your mental capacity. AI and big data, probably a no-brainer to be able to have skills in that area. That's something where this group is going to be particularly well-suited compared to an average alum. And then resiliency and agility in your thinking. Because of how much the future of work is going to drive rapid changes in how, not just like from the innovation piece of things, but rapid changes in how society operates and how businesses can succeed, that ability to quickly change your frame of mind is going to be really essential, because technology is going to continue to drive tighter and tighter iterations in the development of economies. And so resilient, agile, creative, analytical thinking, these things are all way out there, but that's going to be the most important things to focus on for being successful in the future of work.
Yeah, and I mean, that just makes me think of, the school information we got. Check all those boxes.
Absolutely.
Reassuring to know. And then next one's a little bit longer, so bear with me.
Perfect.
But, a very critical topic right now is how AI will influence and change employment. And your work at SkySpecs especially really worked with the manual process, or changing manual processes to more automated processes. Yep. And so, we're very curious to learn about that impact, how you leverage those insights, and how you would, advise people who are also interested in the same thing, or targeting a positive impact on moving towards automated processes.
Sure. There's a few elements here. So that same World Economic Forum data shows that AI and technology advancements in general are going to create a certain number of new jobs while simultaneously removing some jobs that AI technology, for example, are well suited to deal with. It's very close to a net zero between the new jobs that show up and the ones that go away. But if you put it all together, about a quarter, 23%, a quarter of all jobs that exist today will change. So this gets back to the change is inevitable piece here, but growth is a choice. A quarter of all jobs today will change in just the next 5 years. That is going to be the impetus for a lot of change in society. And this is also why that resilient, creative, analytical thinking is going to be so important. That being said, the jobs that are expected to grow the most in the next handful of years, despite AI and autonomy and everything like this, are things like truck driving, agricultural work, things that you would think autonomy and other factors are going to totally disrupt. It's going to be a long time until that happens. Maybe down the road that will, but not quite yet. And then similarly, the jobs that decline, though, are things like manual data entry, right? Like very, very mundane tasks that something like an AI would be very good at. The hope, and part of the charge for all of you to be thinking about how this can impact us as well, is that by removing things like data entry, which is really the antithesis of what humans should be good at and capable of doing, that may free them up to do things that humans are better suited for, and that hopefully we can have better matchmaking. It's gonna be a messy process to get there, but that is the ultimate vision and why I think I'm optimistic about AI tools, even though they will bring about change. Getting through that churn will be tough, but I think the end state will be one where everyone is better off.
Yep, for sure. Thank you.
Well, we are right at 6 o'clock, maybe a minute or so after, so we're going to end our session with Ben this evening. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Of course, thank you very much.
We will be.
Thank you.